Alaska is one of the most beautiful places on Earth. But behind the mountains and the northern lights is a long list of mysteries that have never been solved. Planes vanish without a trace. Whole towns empty overnight. Climbers disappear on open. Slopes and strange lights follow. Aircraft across the night sky. Some of these cases come from harsh weather and dangerous terrain. Others remain unexplained even after years of investigation. The village that walked away, Portlock Turan. Port, Chatham. Under the low clouds that slide over the Kenai Peninsula, there's a stretch of shoreline where silence feels heavier than the mist. The place is called Portlock, sometimes Port Chatham. And if you arrive by boat today, you see only the remains of a settlement that once depended on salmon, hard labor, and the stubbornness required to live in true wilderness. Nothing here moves except the wind. Nothing speaks except the water against the rocks. And yet people still talk about Portlock because this was the village that piece by piece walked away. In the early 1900s, Portlock was a working community. A cannery operated on the bay, drawing seasonal crews who came for the salmon runs. Families lived in cabins along the shore. The men set nets, repaired traps, hauled fish into the processing lines. The women tended small gardens, cooked for large crews, and worked in the cannery during the busiest stretches. It wasn't a large place, but it was functional. A post office, opened in the early 1920s, a sign of permanence in a region where small settlements often came and went with day. Fortunes of a single industry. Portlock wasn't a frontier fantasy. It was a job site, a home, and a location that made sense as long as the work flowed. But the wilderness pressed in from every direction. Behind the village, steep forested slopes rose sharply. The trails wound through dense spruce and hemlock, where shadows stretched even in daylight. Hunters walked these paths often, searching for game, checking trap lines, and gathering wood. They knew the land and they respected it. They understood that weather could change without warning, and that an incorrect step could send a person sliding down a ravine or into a river fed by glacier melt. Then came the stories, first quiet, then louder. Tales of something in the woods, something large, something upright. In the local Alutiiq language, the name often mentioned was Nantinak, a figure tied to older traditions. People described enormous footprints in soft ground, long strides across mossy clearings, and strange cries echoing from the hills. Hunters spoke of feeling watched, of hearing branches snap in the underbrush with a rhythm that didn't match any bear or moose they knew. Some claimed that bodies had been found, men torn apart, tools scattered, scenes that looked less like accidents and more like attacks. The accounts varied, and not all were documented. Still, they stuck. In a place where forest, water, and weather already posed real danger, the idea of something unknown added a layer of unease. People who lived here didn't scare easily. They handled storms, isolation, and months of darkness. But they kept talking about whatever moved in those trees. As the decades passed, life in Portlock became harder. The Canary's fortunes shifted. Jobs have thinned. New road systems were built elsewhere on the Kenai Peninsula, connecting other towns to each other and to Anchorage. Those places grew. The Portlock, accessible only by boat, stood still. With less economic stability, families began leaving for nearby villages with schools, stores, and better access to the outside world. Some of them mentioned the creature stories as part of their reason. Others spoke only about work drying up and the exhaustion of living in a place so remote. By the 1940s, the population had shrunk sharply. The post office closed around mid-century. The community's infrastructure slowly deteriorated. The forest crept back over the paths. The Canary became a skeleton of boards and rust. When the last few families finally moved to other villages on the peninsula, Portlock didn't officially die. It simply faded, one household at a time. Yet, the legends didn't fade. In the years that followed, fishermen who anchored near the old site reported uneasy nights. Hunters who passed through spoke about hearing something move in the trees when the wind was still. Footprints were mentioned. Again, large ones in mud or sand. These stories kept Portlock alive in the imagination, even as the buildings collapsed. But when historians later examined what could be confirmed, they found a different picture. The documented accidents in Portlock were consistent with dangerous work. Logging mishaps, falls, animal encounters, the kinds of tragedies that happen in remote places where medical help is far away. No official record pointed to a series of unexplained killings. No files described a creature stalking the town. Some stories appeared to be retellings of older incidents mixed with exaggeration or shaped by memory over time. The myth grew because the landscape allowed it to grow. The forests above Portlock are vast, steep, and difficult to navigate. Fog can roll in thick enough to hide everything beyond a few steps. The sound of one broken branch can echo through the valley. In a place so quiet, the unknown has room to expand. People pass their stories down not as entertainment, but as warnings, reminders that the wilderness deserves caution and respect. When you stand among the ruins today, the absence is what you feel first. A few wooden pilings leaning at the shoreline, rusted machinery half swallowed by moss, the remains of a cabin sinking into the earth. The trees move slightly with the wind, and the water reflects the gray sky. It is easy to imagine how isolated this place once felt. It is easy to imagine how stories might have grown. Some modern visitors come hoping for proof of the creature. Others arrive looking for history. What they actually find is a village shaped by the challenges of geography, the rise and fall of industry, and the pull of nearby communities that offer better chances for families to stay healthy and connected. The stories of Nantanik remain part of the local oral tradition, important culturally and powerful symbolically. But the reasons Portlock emptied are grounded in economics, access, and the harsh reality of living on the edge of the Gulf of Alaska. The tale of Portlock stands not as a supernatural mystery, but as a reminder of how humans interact with extreme landscapes. When work is steady and people are many, the wilderness feels manageable. When industries decline, population shrinks, and support networks weaken, the same wilderness becomes overwhelming. The silence grows, the shadows lengthen, and stories carrying generations of fear and respect become louder than the wind. Shadows in the depths. The Lake Iliamna monster. Even before the first floatplane strips northward across the vast waters of Lake Iliamna, the surface seems too open, too calm to betray what might move beneath it. The lake stretches for 77 miles, reaching up to 22 miles wide, its maximum depth nearing 1,000 feet. A silent expanse in southwest Alaska. Remote, cold, and full of unanswered questions. This is Alaska's largest lake, and for generations, those who live along its shores have whispered about something enormous living in its depths. The myth begins in the oral traditions of the native Danina people, who called the lake Nelavina, the island's lake, and spoke of a great black fish believed to haunt its waters. Echoes of this creature appear on early Russian charts from the 1800s, a name referencing a fish that bites holes in the heads of bad natives. The stories pass from ritual and cautionary tales to outright local legend. Yet alongside the folktales, there runs a thread of witness testimony. Pilots and fishermen who say they saw something real. In the 1940s and 50s, several bush pilots reported seeing massive shapes just under the surface of the lake. One described dozens of giant fish, aluminium-colored, some long enough to match his pontoon plane in length. Another claimed to spot a creature, 20-30 feet long, swimming silently beneath the water. No surfacing, no visible breathing, a body that simply slid beneath the surface. These reports intensified speculation. Could this be some unknown beast? A sturgeon of record-breaking size, a sleeper shark that found its way inland, or simply the mind misled by remote conditions and eerie isolation? Biologists and fish and game officials took note. The lake hosts an immense salmon run. It also supports one of the few populations of freshwater harbor seals in the world. But nothing the size of 20 to 30 feet has ever been scientifically verified. Some began suggesting simpler, more plausible explanations. One possibility, an isolated population of white sturgeon. These fish are known to grow very large, and if a handful found their way upstream into Iliamna, they might reach sizes beyond expectation. Others pointed to the Pacific sleeper shark, a species that migrates into freshwater-fed fjords and could, in theory, survive in large inland lakes. Yet neither hypothesis has been proven for Iliamna. The recorded science stops at tantalizing lines, unusual hook gear damage, long lines dragged deep. Underwater cameras that recorded nothing but teased the question further. In 2017, in the village of Kakino, a group of children and adults claimed to see at least 3 dark-colored creatures near shore. One described as double the size of our 32-foot drift boat. Their account included a splash, a shape half visible, a rush outward. Local reporters noted the real fear in younger children, who asked whether the lake held something dangerous. Scientists interviewed said, possible misidentification, but also, we don't know. Fishing guide logs tell another curious story. In one case, longline gear anchored on the lake bed was found. Dragged 50 yards, bent metal snaps, hooks bent in impossible directions. The bait weighed enough to hold sharks of 10+ feet. Whatever pulled it away left no carcass. One camera system was set up, baited with dead salmon, and recorded for hours. A heavy strike pulled metal away, then nothing. Those data points align with what we know. If something large is in Iliamna, it remains unseen, untouched by science, uncollected. Meanwhile, the lake's geography supports the possibility of the unknown. It's enormous. It's remote. Many shore areas sparsely populated, many waters seldom traveled. Dive conditions are unfriendly. Cold layers, limited visibility underwater. Fishing areas deep and complex. You could lose something large in this lake and never find it. Still, many scientists say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And here, the evidence remains elusive. No specimen, no verifiable sonar trace released publicly. No peer-reviewed description of a new species from the lake's depths. That absence does not prove there is nothing, but it frames the uncertainty. We have stories, we have anecdotes, we have gear damage. We lack samples. The local lore, however, continues to grow. The lake monster has a name. Ili among charter guides, Jiganak among elders. The beast of Lake Iliamna in tourist pamphlets. Its presence has become one part of the lake's identity, a feature of its mystery. For anglers, it's sometimes half serious, half marketing. For residents, it tends toward caution. Some bring it up only in hushed tones, when the boat engine cuts and the vast dark water spreads out in front of them. When you fly low over the lake, you see the shoreline blur. Treeless islands, steep ridges, shallows turning to deep drop-offs. The lake is clear in places, dark everywhere else. Sunlit shallows give way unexpectedly to fathoms. A diver plunging into those depths encounters temperatures near freezing, and beneath the surface lie fish known to live long, grow slow and massive. Sky salmon hatch in the rivers, feed in the lake, harbor seals forage, trout stalk shallows, all of which mean food sustenance for something perhaps larger. The ecological potential is there, yet science reminds us of limits. White sturgeon, if present, might reach record sizes, but they are still fish, not untamed monsters. Sleeper sharks, likewise, are rare in fresh water, but not impossible. Guides remind novices, when you see a dark shape beneath your boat in deep water, reflex says danger. But reflex can misidentify shadows, currents, floating logs, or seal wakes. The lake's size and remoteness make misidentification easier to accept. And so, the narrative continues. Sightings have tapered off in recent years, partly because boat traffic is less frequent in certain parts. Also, maybe attention shifted. Yet, the stories live on. The lure remains for those who want to visit the lake, fish its depths, ride the float plane in at dawn, and imagine what lies beneath. In documentaries, one sees the lake in aerial grandeur. Mirror flat surfaces broken by wind, the remote cabins along Pedro Bay, families with generations in the area, and always the camera lingers on the water as though waiting. In the end, we stand at a crossroads of possibility and doubt. On one side lies the myth, a creature tens of feet long, dark-colored, unseen but sensed. On the other lies science. Large fish, real gear damage, but no definitive identification. One side asks, what if something still unknown lives here? The other asks, are we projecting mystery where slow-growing fish and deep water suffice? And beneath it all is the lake itself, a realm that doesn't yield its secrets easily. You don't suddenly haul a monster from its bottom without planning and risk. The dark water, the cold, the depth, they all conspire to hide. For now, Lake Amna remains partly known, partly unknown. No home to monsters proven, yet a place where the possibility of something extraordinary remains alive. The ship that wouldn't sink, Ghost Steamer S. Bakimo. The bow at sea does not welcome visitors. It stretches in every direction with a kind of calm that hides its danger. A frozen horizon in winter, an open wilderness in summer, and beneath it all, currents that pull and twist without warning. In this part of the Arctic, ships vanish every year beneath the ice. But once a ship refused to vanish. Once a steel steamer drifted these waters without a crew, without orders, without a destination, surviving storms and winters long after it should have sunk. This is the story of the Bakimo, the ghost ship of Alaska. She began her life far from this frozen edge of the world. Built in Sweden in 1914 and originally named Anger Manelfen, the ship served as a cargo carrier for the Hudson's Bay Company, transporting fur, supplies, and trade goods to remote Arctic outposts. She was rugged enough for the long northern routes and strong enough to push through seasonal ice. For years, Bakimo made her rounds between trading posts in the Canadian and Alaskan Arctic, becoming a familiar sight in communities scattered along the coast. Her role was simple: bring goods in, carry pelts out, then disappear again into the fog and ice until the next season. But in 1931, everything changed. That October, after completing trading operations near Point Barrow, the northernmost settlement of Alaska, Bakimo became trapped in early pack ice. The crew, experienced and prepared for rough conditions initially, believed they could ride out the freeze until Thor opened a path. They waited. The ice didn't release them. In fact, it grew thicker. Temperatures dropped. The pressure of the pack ice began to twist the hull. The crew realized that staying aboard was dangerous. They set up a camp on the ice itself, building makeshift shelters and monitoring the ship from a distance. Days passed. The ice groaned, shifted, and the ship creaked. Then, on a particularly cold night, a violent storm swept through, cutting visibility to nothing. When the weather cleared, Bakimo had broken free and drifted off through the cracked pack. The crew searched and eventually found her again. But the damage to the hull and the unpredictability of the ice convinced the captain and the Hudson's Bay Company that she was no longer seaworthy. They stripped her of valuables. They removed documents, cargo, equipment, and they abandoned her, expecting her to sink soon after in the Arctic winter. She didn't. A few days later, Inuit hunters reported seeing a large steel vessel drifting near the ice edge, empty, silent, but unmistakably still afloat. The crew, shocked, attempted to locate her again, but found no trace. They assumed she had finally gone down. Over the next year, the story spread. A drifting, unmanned steamer had been spotted along the Chukchi coast. Then came the reports from hunters who had boarded her briefly to salvage useful materials. Each sighting carried the same eerie detail: no one aboard, no sign of recent life, no noise except the ice cracking along her hull, just a steel ship moving with wind and current, refusing to die. By 1932, Vakimo was already a legend. She drifted hundreds of miles along the Alaskan Arctic. She was found frozen into ice floes, then freed again months later. She appeared near Wayride, near Barrow, then further west toward the Bowood Sea. One trapsman lived aboard her for days during a storm. Another team entered the ship after spotting her in a lead between ice fields and found her decks covered in frost. The interior is quiet but intact. No one claimed her. No one could predict her path. She was simply out there, a ghost on the water. Year after year, the sightings continued. The Arctic is a place where time slows, where structures endure longer than expected, and where ice preserves more than it destroys. But still, the endurance of a steel cargo ship drifting freely for decades defies simple explanation. Storms should have taken her down. Pressure ice should have crushed her. Waves should have breached her hull. Instead, she sailed on, an unmanned survivor of a failed voyage. In 1933, she was spotted again, trapped in pack ice. In 1935, another sighting placed her drifting along the coast. In 1939, a group of herders saw her and attempted to board her. Shifting ice forced them back. Through the 1940s, she became something like a landmark, showing herself every few years before disappearing again. Hunters would report seeing a long, thin profile on the horizon, rusty, leaning slightly, but unmistakably still afloat. The Arctic, in all its vastness, became her home. She drifted along some of the harshest waters in the world: the Chukchi Sea, the Beaufort Sea, the ice-ridden channels north of Alaska, where storms form quickly and disappear even faster. The environment around her was deadly. Ships vanished here every decade. But Bamo stayed on the surface, moving with the rhythm of melting and freezing seasons. She existed in a space few vessels ever last long in, not anchored, not navigated, not controlled, only carried. In 1955, more than 20 years after her abandonment, she was seen again. By then, she had become a maritime mystery. People wondered what held her up. Some said it was the cold water slowing corrosion. Some said it was the cold water slowing corrosion. Others said she may have settled low in the water, but still floated on trapped air pockets. Whatever the reason, she remained. Then came the sighting that would close her final chapter. In March 1969, a crew flying over the Beaufort Sea reported a ship trapped in the ice. It matched Bamo's proportions. It matched her appearance. It was the last confirmed sighting. What happened after that moment is unknown. The Arctic ice shifts. Every winter, pressure ridges rise and fall. Huge floes collide like tectonic plates. A steel ship, even one as stubborn as Bachimo, cannot survive the pressure forever. At some point, somewhere in those frozen miles, she either sank beneath shifting ice or was crushed and dragged to the seafloor. Or perhaps she still lies trapped under layers of compacted ice, preserved like a relic waiting for a melt that reveals her unexpectedly. No wreck has ever been found. Not by divers, not by sonar surveys, not by researchers. Studying old maritime routes. For a ship that wandered so far, she left behind no grave. Her absence today is part of what makes her story linger. The Arctic holds on to its secrets. Ships vanish beneath the ice and become part of the seafloor. Others drift until storms erase them. But BMO drifted for nearly 40 years without a single person at the helm, surviving conditions that destroy. Most vessels within months. Some describe her story with a sense of wonder. Others feel unease at the sight of a steel hull appearing out of fog with no crew and no sound. A ship meant to serve people instead moved on its own, shaped only by currents, winds, and seasons. The northwestern coast of Alaska still feels like the right place for her. Endless horizons, shifting ice sheets, gray water stretching into clouds. A place where the line between living and lost becomes thin. A place where a ship without a crew can outlast time. 44 souls over snag. The 1950C-54 Skymaster disappearance. Under the pale winter light of January 26, 1950, a Douglas C-54D Sky rolled down the runway at Ellendorf Air Force Base in Anchorage and lifted into the cold evening sky. Inside were 44 people. 8 crew members and 36 passengers, military personnel, a civilian technician, a young mother, and her child. They were bound for Great Falls, Montana, following a route used countless times by Air Force transports. Nothing about the flight seemed unusual. The crew was experienced. The weather, while cold, was manageable. The aircraft was sturdy and familiar. It was the type of journey that begins quietly and should end the same way. The Skymaster headed southeast, climbing over the mountains and across the vast winter landscape of Alaska and the Yukon. 2 hours into the flight, near the remote settlement of Snag, the pilot made a routine radio call. He reported mild turbulence and icing. Nothing out of the ordinary for that time of year. The tower acknowledged. The call ended, and that was the last time anyone heard from the aircraft. Beyond Snag, the terrain becomes a world of white ridges, frozen lakes, valleys hidden under deep snow, and mountains that rise sharply into the flight path. The temperature that night hovered near extremes. Snag was known for some of the coldest recorded temperatures in North America. A night flight over that region demanded precision. Any change in altitude, any shift in weather, any invisible layer of ice on the wings could become a threat. As the Skymaster continued south, nothing signaled trouble. No distress call, no emergency transmission. It simply disappeared from the sky. When the aircraft failed to check in over Ishihik, another waypoint on its route, an alarm bell sounded. The Air Force quickly realized something was wrong. Within hours, one of the largest search operations in North American history launched. The United States and Canada mobilized a joint force, dozens of aircraft, thousands of personnel, and a search grid that expanded day by day. They flew in tight patterns over forests, mountains, and frozen wetlands, scouring an area so vast that even modern satellites would struggle to cover it in detail. The cold worked against them. Weather systems rolled in suddenly. Fog sank into valleys. Snow covered any sign of impact. Frozen lakes created a smooth, deceptive surface where wreckage could settle invisibly under ice. The Yukon wilderness absorbed, swallowed shadows, and gave no clues. The searchers faced danger themselves. 3 aircraft involved in the operation crashed during the mission. An unsettling reminder that even the rescuers were at risk. One pilot talked for miles over frozen ground to get back to safety. Every crew in the air understood that the same terrain that hid the missing Skymaster could easily take another life. On board the vanished aircraft were people whose stories never reached an ending. Military personnel transferring to new assignments. A civilian technician heading south. a young mother preparing for the birth of her second child, her toddler son, who had never experienced a long flight before. They were ordinary travelers trusting that the aircraft, the crew, and the route would carry them safely through the night. No one could have known that their journey would become one of the Arctic's greatest aviation mysteries. Search teams on the ground combed riverbanks and mountain passes. They followed reports of smoke, distant reflections, and sightings of debris that later turned out to be nothing. The region between Snag and Whitehorse, where the plane should have been, was a maze of unmapped areas, steep ridges, and deep snow. Investigators realized that even a large aircraft could vanish completely if it went down in a narrow valley, under tree cover, or on a frozen lake whose surface later sealed the evidence beneath ice. The weeks of searching turned into one of the most exhausting missions ever attempted in the North. Aircraft flew over the same areas again and again. Ground teams hiked through waist-deep snow. Every promising lead unraveled. Some searchers believed the plane might have veered far off course during bad weather. Others thought it could have hit a mountainside hidden by clouds. Still others suspected the aircraft broke through the ice of a remote lake and sank silently to the bottom. The official search lasted for weeks. Unofficially, individuals continued looking for years, but no debris, no fuel slick, no scattered equipment, no bodies. Nothing was ever found. As time passed, people tried to understand how something so large could vanish so completely. The answer lay in the landscape itself. The Yukon and eastern Alaska form one of the most unforgiving regions on Earth. Ice and snow shift constantly. Avalanches bury entire slopes. Lakes freeze and thaw, concealing anything beneath the surface. Winds push snow into deep drifts that can hide metal for decades. In this environment, a 90-feet aircraft can become invisible within hours. Even today, experienced bush pilots say that a plane can go down in that terrain and remain undiscovered indefinitely. The wilderness has swallowed countless wrecks, some found decades later, others still missing. The Skymaster, with all 44 souls aboard, became part of that list. The disappearance influenced search and rescue protocols, flying routes, and the way aircraft were tracked across remote northern airspace. It became a case studied by aviation historians and investigators who still debate the most likely scenario: controlled descent into terrain, catastrophic icing, mechanical failure, or disorientation during a winter storm. But beyond theories lies the simple, unsettling truth. The plane vanished without a trace. Families waited for news that never came. Military officials kept files open for years, hoping for a break. Explorers and researchers have occasionally proposed new search efforts, but the region remains vast, difficult to access, and constantly reshaped by the seasons. A wreck buried under snow in one decade might lie under several meters of ice the next. The last radio call at Snag remains the only certainty. After that moment, the flight faded into the frozen wilderness. For every aircraft that completes the journey across the North, one story like this reminds pilots of the fragility of flight in the Arctic, where weather, terrain, and silence hold the final word. The Alaska Triangle, where a congressman's plane never landed. The cold air over Alaska can feel like an invitation to adventure, to discovery, but it can also carry away those who venture into its vastness, leaving only silence behind. Stretching from the urban hum of Anchorage through the glaciers of Juneau and up to the silent tundra of Utqiagvik, there lies a region where the wilderness doesn't just lie dormant, it dominates. This region is known as the Alaska Triangle, and within its bounds, tales of disappearance have grown long and complex. The event that brought it to national attention, however, was the disappearance of a small political aircraft in 1972, carrying two powerful U.S. congressmen. On the morning of October 16, 1972, Hale Boggs, at that time the House Majority Leader, boarded a twin-engine Cessna 310 from Anchorage bound for Juneau. With him was Nick Baggs Sr., Alaska's youth representative, along with Begitch's aide, Russell Brown, and pilot Don Jones. Their mission was political, fundraising, and campaigning across Alaska's rugged terrain. They expected to fly for a few hours, land, speak, shake hands, and return. The skies that day, though, held no routine. Shortly after taking off, the plane was reported overdue. The mountains and sea below them bore no sign of the aircraft's passage. The search began almost immediately, but what followed was immense. More than 40 military aircraft, dozens of civilian planes, and a grid covering more than 300,000 square miles of wilderness. Teams scanned ice-covered fjords, forested ridges, lakes that freeze to vast sheets of ice, and shorelines where driftwood and wreckage could hide for years. Yet after 39 days, the official search was suspended. No wreckage, no human remains, no trace of those aboard the plane. While that flight was unfolding, the broader timeline of the Alaska Triangle was growing longer. Researchers count more than 20,000 people who have vanished in that region since the 1970s. Hikers, bush pilots, float plane passengers. Locals simply travel between communities. The rate of disappearances here is more than double the national average. Some chalk it up to geography. Steep mountains, ice rivers, unpredictable weather, magnetic anomalies that can disrupt navigational instruments. Others raise voices of myth. Corridors where compasses spin. Weird lights in the sky. Legends of shape-shifting creatures or alien abductions. Back in October 1972, inside that twin-engine plane, the four men faced more than politics. They flew above a land that rewards caution and punishes error. Weather in Alaska can shift without warning. Clouds form, visibility drops. Wind slams into ridges and sends air upward in turbulent eddies. Icing builds on wings, faster than most pilots expect in other regions. Instruments can mislead. Routes that look safe from the ground hold hidden valleys and gusts. That flight's final hours are unknown. Silence the only recorded signal. Simultaneously, thousands of miles below the surface of this region, the wilderness, began a long work of erasure. Lakes freeze over, concealing anything beneath. Snow accumulates. Driftwood and wreckage sink into ice. Rivers flood, change course, bury tracks. The terrain, the weather, the night. Each acts like a hand pulling. Shadows over evidence until nothing remains. The search teams flew grid patterns, fleets of aircraft lighting up the sky. But for all the effort, they hunted among countless possibilities. Crashed on a glacier, underwater, hidden in a fjord, or carried off by drift ice and current. The theory of human error merged with the properties of the landscape to create a perfect vanishing act. And while the twin-engine plane carries a political dimension, the broader phenomenon of the Alaska Triangle brings different narratives into collision. The myths speak of energy vortices, strange magnetic fields, alien craft, even indigenous legends of creatures that lure travelers into the woods. But when pressed, many experts point to the simpler truth. The wilderness here is unmatched in challenge. Visibility can drop to zero. Navigational instruments can shift. Terrain mapped decades ago may not reflect current conditions. A pilot on one course might find himself heading into an unseen ridge. A hiker following a trail might step into a snow-covered riverbed, vanish within minutes. The myths gain traction because they offer an explanation for what on the surface appears inexplicable. But the fact remains the raw material here is risk. When the missing flight of 1972 entered the annals of the Triangle's law, it became more. Then a case file. It became proof to many that this region could swallow planes, men, stories. It became a cautionary tale. It prompted changes in aviation safety. After that disappearance, rules around emergency locator transmitters, ELTs, and tracking became more strict. But even as procedures evolve, the geography remains wild, vast, uncertain. For the residents of Alaska, the disappearance did not pass into distant myth. Families of the missing waited. Public attention surged. One of the men on board, Nick Begich, was re-elected in absentia, despite having vanished a few weeks. Before the vote, he received 56% of the vote, even though his body was never found, and he was declared dead months later. The political world did not expect such an outcome. The wilderness, however, simply continued its course. In the years since, dozens more flights, travelers, hunters, and adventurers have entered the triangle and never returned. Some turned up. Decades later, parts of their stories pieced together from debris or DNA on remains found far from their last known position. Some remain entirely lost. Each new disappearance reinforces one truth. The Alaska Triangle is not a ghost story. It is the intersection of human aspiration and extreme environment. In that place where a congressman and his plane vanished, we find the heart of this region's mystery. The politics and power involved in that flight remind us that no one is immune to the wild. The myths remind us that humans strive to explain what they cannot measure. But beneath both lies the terrain itself. Mountains higher than many countries' peaks. Forests so vast they swallow sound. Ice flows so dynamic they rearrange coastlines in a single winter dot when we chart the flight of October 16, 1972, and overlay it with the timelines of aircraft lost, hunters gone missing, and unexplained vanishings. A pattern emerges, not of conspiracy alone, but of extreme risk. A place where the margin for error is thin, where technology meets terrain and can still fail. The plane vanished in one timeline. The search followed another. The myth spun a third. But all three converge in this triangle of Alaska, where absence itself becomes presence. Radar ghost Japan Airlines Flight 1628 and the UFO over Alaska. The winter sky over Alaska can feel endless at night. A deep moving darkness, broken only by starlight cockpit instruments and the hum of engines cutting through sub-zero air. On November 17, 1986, that darkness was interrupted by something no one aboard Japan Airlines Flight 1628 expected to see. What began as a routine cargo run across the Arctic turned into one of the most detailed, persistent, and debated encounters in aviation history. The aircraft was a Boeing 747-200F flying from Paris to Tokyo with a stop in Reiki, then across the polar route toward Anchorage for a refueling stop. Captain Kenju Teruchi, a former fighter pilot with thousands of flight hours, commanded the flight. His crew consisted of First Officer Takanori Tamuji and Flight Engineer Yoshio Takura. All three were seasoned, calm, and familiar with long-haul night flights. As the aircraft crossed into Alaska's airspace, the evening had already settled into deep twilight. The mountains were hidden beneath clouds, the sky faintly lit by the moon, and everything seemed predictable. Then, at roughly 5:11 p.m. Alaska time, Captain Teruchi noticed lights ahead of the plane. Two bright, unusual objects that appeared to be moving fast, closing in from the left. At first, he assumed they were military jets, but as they approached, their shape didn't match anything the crew recognized. The objects were rectangular and emitted an intense, fluctuating glow. They maneuvered with unusual precision, changing position in ways that didn't match normal aircraft motion. Tucci radioed Anchorage to air traffic control to report what he was seeing. His tone was professional but uneasy. In the cockpit, the crew watched the lights pace the aircraft. Sometimes they moved in front of the 747's nose, illuminating its cabin with a pale, bright wash of light. Sometimes they drifted slightly above and to the side. The crew later described the objects as having a kind of energy field around them, pulsating, shimmering, shifting in intensity, as though heat or electrical activity distorted the air. While the crew kept visual contact, a separate timeline unfolded on the ground. At the anchorage center, controllers began scanning their radar. They expected to find an aircraft or perhaps a military craft moving at high speed. Instead, they saw intermittent radar paints, returns that appeared briefly, vanished, then resurfaced in different positions. One radar technician later said the returns didn't behave like a conventional aircraft. They were there, then gone, then back again. The lack of consistency made identification difficult. Controllers asked the crew of JL-1628 for updates, trying to match what the pilots saw with what radar recorded. They asked whether the lights could be stars, reflections, or illusions. The crew insisted what they were seeing was solid, structured, and moving with intention. The objects continued pacing the 747 for several minutes. Then something even stranger appeared. A massive dark shape behind the two smaller lights. Captain Tarucci described it as a huge mothership, larger than an aircraft carrier. He later estimated the dark object didn't emit bright light like the smaller ones, but the crew said they could see its outline against the faint sky, a massive structure with a surface that seemed metallic. Anchorage controllers, concerned for the crew's safety, requested a radar-equipped U.S. Air Force aircraft to intercept and confirm. None were close enough to reach the flight in time. Air traffic control then suggested a change of course to see if the object would follow. The crew accepted and turned to a heading of 210. The lights followed. Then, after nearly an hour of pacing the flight, the objects abruptly vanished. No slow fade, no distant retreat. They simply disappeared from view. Meanwhile, inside the radar room, the intermittent returns disappeared as well. No one could locate the objects again. The crew reached Anchorage without further incident. The moment the aircraft rolled to a stop on the runway, the pilots filed an immediate report. What followed was an official investigation by the FAA. Captain Tarucci was interviewed extensively. Recordings of the radar logs and controller communications were reviewed. The FAA concluded that the crew had indeed seen something physical, something that radar also registered, though inconsistently, but they could not explain what it was. Behind the scenes, military officials took interest. Internal memos later revealed that the incident escalated to higher levels within the U.S. government. The combination of radar confirmation, pilot testimony, and duration of the sighting made it unusual. Most UFO reports last seconds. This encounter lasted nearly 50 minutes. Parallel to the official inquiry, conversations unfolded quietly among pilots, radar technicians, and investigators. Some leaned toward unconventional explanations, objects capable of non-standard motion, unknown technology, or something entering and leaving radar range in ways no aircraft should. Others looked for natural explanations. Optical illusions caused by atmospheric layers, bright planets distorted by ice crystals, or military aircraft flying without transponders. But those explanations never aligned cleanly with what the crew described. The intensity of the light, the structural appearance, the pacing maneuver, and the sheer size of the dark object didn't match stars or planets, and no known military aircraft performed the behaviors reported. Captain Tarucci eventually faced professional consequences. Authorities labeled him overly imaginative, and he was temporarily grounded. Yet years later, FAI officials who were involved privately stated they believed the crew saw something real, something that didn't fit conventional frameworks. Around the same time, other pilots in Alaska reported strange sightings. Radar technicians spoke of unusual returns that appeared and vanished without explanation. The combination of remote airspace, cold weather, and vast unpopulated regions made Alaska a hot spot for unidentified aerial phenomena. The JL 1628 event simply became the most famous due to the quality of testimony and the duration of the encounter. The parallel timelines, the cockpit watching glowing structures keeping pace with them, the control room tracking erratic radar. Signals formed a narrative that still stands as one of the best documented in modern aviation. The crew maintained their story consistently for decades. Investigators kept returning to the case. The FAA's own records pointed to something unexplained, not imagined, but observed. In the end, the flight landed safely. But the empty stretch of sky between Anchorage and Fairbanks still holds a lingering question. What exactly flew beside Flight 1628 that night in silence, glowing through the cold Alaskan air, then disappeared without leaving a trace? The lost bomb, a broken arrow from Alaska. In the early years of the Cold War, long before most Americans understood the scale of the nuclear arsenal being built around them, the far north became a shadowed arena of preparation. Bombers lifted off from frozen runways in Alaska and Canada on missions that were never meant to be seen by the public. They practiced routes toward the Soviet Union, tested navigation across the Arctic, and carried weapons that symbolized the harsh logic of the era. Be ready at all times, even when the world is not looking. On February 13, 1950, one of those practice runs began at Air Force Base near Fairbanks. A massive conveyor, B-36B Peacemaker, taxied across the snow-covered ground. Its 6 piston engines and 2 jet boosters prepared to lift the world's largest bomber into the sky. On board were 17 crew members, and inside its bomb base sat a Mark V nuclear weapon, not fully assembled for detonation, but containing conventional explosives and natural uranium components. It was a real weapon carried on what was officially described as a simulated strike mission. The flight plan called for the aircraft to fly over the Arctic, then south towards San Francisco, mimicking the kind of route it would take if a real neither nuclear strike were ever ordered. The Cold War was only beginning, but the training intensity reflected a world settling into fear and suspicion. For the first few hours, the mission progressed normally. The aircraft climbed into the icy night, heavy with fuel and cargo. The cold at altitude pressed against the hull, making even minor mechanical issues dangerous. The B-36 was a powerful machine, but one that struggled in extreme conditions. Its engines were known to have problems in cold weather, and that night, the crew soon heard what they feared: sudden vibrations, then failure. One engine went out, then another, then a third. The Peacemaker could not stay aloft with that much weight and only half its power. The crew attempted to stabilize the aircraft, but the situation worsened. Losing altitude over mountains and ocean, they faced a grave choice, one that combined military protocol, physics, and risk. The nuclear bomb could not crash with them. Even though the bomb's nuclear core, the plutonium or highly enriched uranium pit, was not installed, the weapon still held thousands of pounds of conventional explosives and uranium tamper material. If it impacted the Earth intact, the conventional explosives could detonate, dispersing radioactive materials over an unknown stretch of land or sea. The crew knew what the manual said: in a failing aircraft, jettison the weapon over an uninhabited area or the ocean and let it fall from altitude in hopes that impact would destroy it without nuclear yield. With the bomber losing altitude fast, they opened the bomb bay and released the Mark V into the darkness below somewhere over the Pacific west of Canada. The crew later reported seeing an explosion, likely the conventional component, but the ocean swallowed whatever remained. Lightened but still crippled, the aircraft did not recover. The pilot ordered the crew to bail out over a remote part of British Columbia. Of the 17 on board, 12 parachuted into freezing night conditions. 5 did not make it out in time and went down with the aircraft. The survivors endured brutal terrain: snow caps, forests, steep ravines. Search teams eventually rescued them days later. In the weeks that followed, U.S. and Canadian forces located portions of the wreckage on Mount Clujet. Twisted metal, scattered parts, and burned fragments told the story of the bomber's final moments. But something was missing. The bomb. The ocean impact site remained unknown. The Mark V had been dropped far offshore, and wartime secrecy meant no public announcement. For decades, only fragments of official statements acknowledged the event. The U.S. government confirmed that a nuclear weapon had been jettisoned, but emphasized it contained no file core. That status made it what the military calls a broken arrow, an accident involving a nuclear weapon that does not create a nuclear detonation. Still, questions lingered. The Mark V bomb design used natural uranium in its tamper, hundreds of pounds of it. That uranium did not disappear. The conventional explosives may have detonated, but it was never clear whether the casing fractured completely or whether parts of the weapon sank largely intact. No recovery operation was ever announced. In the cold political environment of 1950, a lost nuclear weapon, even without its core, carried heavy implications. Scientists studying lost or jettisoned weapons note that the impact of a freefall bomb into the ocean can behave unpredictably. At terminal velocity, water can act like a solid. Some weapons break apart on impact, scattering components across the seafloor. Others penetrate surprisingly deep before settling. Natural uranium metal is heavy and sinks quickly. Conventional explosives, if not fully detonated, can remain underwater indefinitely. The bomb might be in fragments over a wide area or resting largely intact under layers of silt. The Cold War introduced dozens of such uncertainties. Aircraft routinely carried training weapons, partial assemblies, and sometimes fully armed devices. Not every accident was publicly acknowledged, and the North Pacific, with its violent storms and deep waters, kept secrets well. In the years after the crash, hikers and researchers reached the wreckage site on Mount Clujet. The aluminum frame, engines, and turret sections remained scattered across the mountain, but nothing at the crash site related to the bomb because the bomb had not been on the aircraft when it struck the ground. The vanishing point lay far out at sea. Oceanographers later noted that the region where the bomb was dropped is complex. Strong currents, steep underwater terrain, and deep basins make recovery extremely difficult. Even modern search technology would struggle. The drop zone covers many square miles, and with no precise coordinates, any search becomes guesswork. The weapon may lie thousands of feet down under a moving landscape of water and sediment. Scientists today emphasize that the uranium tamper and remaining explosive components likely pose minimal risk to the environment. Uranium metal corrodes, slowly dispersing gradually, but the historical significance remains large. Somewhere on the seafloor lies a nuclear-era artifact, a reminder of a time when training missions carried weapons designed for global war. In the aftermath of the crash, the U.S. military reviewed procedures for carrying nuclear weapons over long distances. The event marked one of the first publicly acknowledged nuclear-related accidents. It pushed policy towards safer handling protocols, assembly practices, and transportation rules. Shifts that shaped Cold War nuclear doctrine for decades. Yet the bomb itself remains out there, location unknown, a device built for destruction. Dropped into an ocean it was never meant to enter, a weapon without a target, without a crew, without a home base. Lost not through conflict, but through mechanical failure and winter skies over Alaska. The bomber was found. The crew was found, but the weapon they released slipped into the Pacific and was never seen again. 8 bodies, no killer. The investor massacre at Craig Dawn came slowly over the docks of Craig, Alaska, on September 7, 1982. The fishing season was drawing down and the harbor, usually filled with noise, crews calling to one another. The smell of diesel and salt was quiet, but something was wrong. Out on the water near Fish Island, smoke was rising from a vessel. It drifted upward in a thick, dark column. Someone radioed it in. Others launched skiffs to look. When they got close, they saw the name painted on the stern: Investor. The Investor was no ordinary boat. It was one of the most modern, most valuable commercial fishing vessels in the fleet. A 58 FT served and captained by 28-year-old Mark Colthurst of Blaine, Washington. He was known as a disciplined skipper, a family man, and someone who ran his boat with precision. He had brought his wife Irene and their 2 young children on this trip. Alongside them were 4 young crewmen, 8 people in total. The day before the fire, the Investor had tied up in Craig's Harbor after a successful fishing run. Witnesses later said the mood seemed normal. The cultist had gone too. Dinner at a local cafe. Mark had chatted with other skippers. The crew was seen buying groceries, moving gear, doing the ordinary tasks of fishermen in port. Nothing looked tense. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The boat would refuel, rest overnight, and head out again in the morning. But by morning, the Investor was burning. As firefighters and volunteers reached the vessel, flames had already gutted the cabin. Heat twisted metal and cracked windows. When they boarded what remained of the ship, they found a scene beyond anything the small town of Craig had ever witnessed. Inside the charred hull were bodies, not lost in an accidental fire, not victims of a mechanical failure, but shot. Someone had murdered everyone on board, then tried to erase the crime with gasoline and flame. The victims were identified as Mark and Irene Colthurst, their 5-year-old daughter, their 4-year-old son, and all 4 crewmen. Gunshot wounds confirmed their deaths occurred before the fire. The killer had executed 8 people in the night, then attempted to destroy the evidence. The discovery shocked Alaska's fishing community, where isolated conflicts happen, but such cold, methodical violence does not. Craig was a small town. People knew each other. Many of the fishermen had grown up working side by side. And yet, someone had boarded the Investor while it was moored in port, murdered an entire family and their crew, set the boat adrift, and vanished. Reconstructing the final hours became an investigation built on fragments. Witnesses recalled seeing a young man leaving the harbor early that morning, stepping off the Investor and climbing onto another boat. Some described him as calm, as though nothing unusual had happened. Others mentioned a person seen on the Investor's skiff moving quickly away from the burning vessel. But sightings were inconsistent, memory unreliable under stress, and the town was soon overwhelmed by police troopers, Coast Guard personnel, and investigators flown in from around the state. Mark's reputation meant he kept clear boundaries on his boat. He was known to run a tight ship. No drugs, no alcohol on board, no risky deals. Investigators found no evidence of debts, no criminal connections, nothing that pointed to a financial motive. The Cultures were a respected family. The crew members were young fishermen looking for work and adventure. Possible motives seemed to evaporate as soon as they were considered. Without motive, investigators turned to opportunity. Who had been at the docks that night? Who had reason to board the Investor? Who owned a handgun that matched the type used? Dozens of people were questioned. Fishermen from out of town, seasonal workers, teenagers living on boats for the summer, deckhands who'd been drinking, strangers, seen in bars but remembered only vaguely. But nothing aligned with certainty. Eventually, attention centered on a young deckhand from another boat. someone who had been seen near the coulthers, someone whose movements that night seemed unusual. He fit a basic description given by witnesses. He had reportedly acted strangely after the fire, and he had no clear alibi for the early hours of September 7th. He was arrested, charged, and put on trial. The case became one of Alaska's most watched. Criminal proceedings, a community desperate for answers, a courtroom filled with grief. Investigators testifying about fragments of evidence, and a defendant who denied involvement. But the case crumbled under scrutiny. Witness accounts were inconsistent. Timelines did not fit neatly. No murder weapon was ever recovered. No fingerprints, no DNA, no direct evidence tied the suspect to the boat. The prosecution argued circumstantial patterns. The defense argued coincidence and mistaken identity. After 2 trials, the first ending in a hung jury, the second in an acquit, the accused walked free. If he was innocent, the real killer was still out there. If he was guilty, the case had failed to prove it. Meanwhile, the community of Craig faced a different kind of disappearance. The disappearance of justice. A crime this violent, this carefully executed, and this total in its destruction should have left a trail. Yet, the killer managed to avoid leaving the clues investigators needed. Whether it was a moment of opportunity taken by someone out of sight or a targeted act hidden within the routine movements of a fishing town, the truth never surfaced. The investor itself, once one of the finest boats on the water, became a symbol of lingering fear. Fishermen in the years after spoke about locking their doors at night while in port, something few had bothered with before. Parents warned their children to stay close, and every person who had been in Craig that week carried the memory of smoke rising from the boat that held 8 lives cut short. Today, the official case remains open, but dormant. No new suspects, no new evidence, no confessions. The wreck of the investor was raised, inspected, and eventually destroyed, leaving no vessel behind to study again. The only survivors of that night are the stories told by those who were there, and the unanswered questions about who stepped aboard the investor in the darkness, how they moved through the vessel, why they carried out the killings, and how they managed to disappear into a small community without a trace. A boat full of witnesses cannot speak. A burned crime scene cannot reveal what it lost. And a killer who left no trail becomes another shadow in a state known for its vast spaces and deep silences. The legend who never came down. Naomi Wamura on Denali. High on the Alaska range, winds tear across ridgelines with a force that feels almost personal. Temperatures fall so fast they seem to drop out of the sky. The air grows thin, the snow hardens to ice, and even experienced climbers feel the mountain watching them. In February 1984, one man walked alone into that world with a goal few believe possible to climb Denali, the highest peak in North America, entirely solo in the dead of winter. His name was Naomi Wamura, a climber whose accomplishments had already made him his legend long before he stepped onto the Chilean glacier for the final time. Wamura was known for choosing challenges no one else dared attempt. He was the first person to reach the North Pole alone. He traversed Greenland by dog sled. He completed a solo raft descent of the Amazon River. But Denali, even in summer, is a mountain with teeth. In winter, it becomes something else entirely. A landscape shaped by katabatic winds, whiteouts, avalanches, and cold that can shatter metal. Fewer than a handful of climbers had ever been on its upper slopes alone in February. Wura believed that solitude was part of the challenge. He carried minimal gear compared to other expeditions. His style emphasized speed, efficiency, and trust in his own instincts. That approach worked for him on other mountains. On Denali, it meant that every decision carried enormous weight. How much fuel to bring, where to camp, when to climb, and how far to push in a weather window that might close without warning. He began his ascent in late January. No team accompanied him. He set his camps, climbed higher, cached supplies, and retreated when storms rolled in. Rangers and other climbers at lower elevations sometimes caught his radio transmissions. Short, calm reports about his position and the conditions. Each update reinforced what everyone already knew. He was moving fast and climbing confidently. On February 12, 1984, Mamura made his final push for the summit. That night, a radio transmission crackled down the mountain. He had reached the top. He said he was descending and had made it to around 18,000 feet. Other climbers later reported seeing a headlamp far up the mountain, a single light in a vast field of darkness moving steadily. After that, the radio went silent. The days following his last transmission were defined by storms. Hurricane-force winds racked the upper slopes. Temperatures plunged well below 40. No one could climb high enough to reach the elevation where Wimura should have been. Rescue teams waited for a break in the weather, but Denali and winter rarely gives one. Days passed, then weeks. When the weather finally eased enough for a search, a team climbed to the upper camps. They found traces of Wimura's journey, a snow cave he had carved for shelter, footprints fossilized by drifting ice and gear caches. Everything suggested he had been moving carefully, doing what a seasoned winter climber should do. But there was no sign of him. No body, no fallen pack, no abandoned tools that would indicate an accident site. Denali is a mountain of hidden spaces. Crevices open suddenly and swallow climbers. Cornices break without warning. Wind slabs shear from ridges and drop thousands of feet. Even experienced alpinists misjudge the effects of cold altitude and exhaustion. Wara had planned meticulously, but the margin between safety and danger narrowed sharply at 18,000 feet in February. A misplaced step, a sudden storm, an equipment failure. Any of them could erase a climber from the surface of the mountain. Mountaineers who studied the route believe he likely ran into trouble after his summit descent. He might have tried to reach his high camp in worsening weather. He might have slipped into a crevasse masked by windblown snow. He might have been caught in an avalanche triggered by the storms that rolled across the peak. In those conditions, even a few seconds of exposure can become fatal. Search teams returned multiple times that year, and in later seasons, climbers kept an eye out for signs of him. Denali sometimes gives back remains decades later as glaciers shift and ice melts around their edges. But in Mumira's case, nothing. Surface. His body may lie deep within the glacier, frozen in motion below layers of ice that move inch by inch each year. Or he may rest on an exposed slope that has since been buried by avalanches. Disappearance is not just a mountaineering mystery. It reflects the tension between human determination and the environment he chose to enter. His minimalist approach demanded discipline. It also meant he carried fewer safety margins. No partner to check ropes, no second person to help on a fall. No extra fuel to melt snow when winds drained his energy. He knew the risks. He accepted them. And he believed he could move faster and safer alone. Weather scientists reviewing the event noted that the storms during the days after his summit attempt were among the fiercest recorded that season. Wind speeds near the summit may have exceeded 100 miles per hour. Temperatures were cold enough to cause frostbite in minutes, and equipment failures were common in such extremes. Even if Wimura had reached his camp safely, surviving that weather long enough for a rescue would have been nearly impossible. Climbers who followed his route years later described the upper mountain as eerily quiet, as if touched by the story he left behind. They found remnants of his camps, small, efficient, dug into the snow with precision. They found no evidence of panic or disorganization. Everything suggested he was in control until the moment he vanished. In Japan, Wimura has become a cultural hero. His expeditions were followed by newspapers, and students learned his name the way others might learn astronauts or explorers. When word spread that he had vanished on Denali, thousands watched for updates. Ceremonies were held. Climbers from around the world wrote tributes, but the mountain held its silence. Denali's winter slopes reveal little, even to the most skilled searchers. The snow hides everything. The ice shifts constantly. What disappears there often stays lost. Wimura, who had conquered some of the harshest environments on Earth, met his final mystery on a mountain he respected deeply. His last radio message, calm, factual, almost understated, remains the final trace of him. A voice carried over wind and static, reporting success, reporting progress, unknowing of the storms forming above and below. Somewhere on Denali, the legend never made it down. The mountain that keeps its dead. Denali's unrecovered climbers dot high above the tree line where the air thins and the winds grind against the rock like a living force. Denali rises through the clouds. To climbers, the mountain is a test of strength and judgment. To rescuers, it is a place where decisions must weigh both courage and consequence. But to those who have spent years studying its terrain, Denali is something else as well. A mountain that keeps what it takes. Every climbing season, teams from around the world arrive in Talenta, load their gear, and board small planes to the Chilean glacier. From there, they begin the long ascent toward 20,310 feet, navigating an environment that shifts hour by hour. The mountain's beauty hides its dangers. Deep crevasses that run like hidden rivers, slopes that can collapse without warning, and storms that turn clear skies into whiteout in minutes. Many climbers reach the summit and descend safely. Some do not, and among those who die on Denali, not all are ever found. Decades of National Park Service records hold stories of climbers who vanished into the mountain, not because they were lost in the traditional sense, but because the geography itself absorbed them. In some cases, teams watched a partner fall into a crease so deep that their headlamp faded into darkness. The sound of their voice was swallowed by ice. In other cases, avalanches covered entire routes, leaving behind a surface as smooth as untouched snow. Denali's glaciers move constantly. What looks like solid ground can be a thin crust over empty space. On the lower mountain, crevasses can stretch hundreds of feet down, narrowing into slots that make recovery impossible. Rangers describe these spaces as ice corridors shaped by forces too strong for human intervention. A climber who falls into one may be unreachable within seconds. Some bodies resurface decades later as the glacier shifts. Others remain permanently encased in ice, carried slowly toward lower elevations, but still buried beneath meters of compressed snow. The mountain's cold preserves them, but its movement hides them. One of the most cited examples occurred in 1980, when an avalanche swept down a section of the West Buttress Route. It buried several climbers under tons of snow and ice. Conditions were too dangerous for recovery. The mountain had already decided that digging would risk more lives. Rangers marked the general location and moved on, knowing the glacier would eventually shift the remains, not days later, but years or decades. Other climbers disappear without witnesses. When storms roll in, they erase tracks, footprints, and rope lines. A pair of climbers navigating in near-zero visibility may wander just a few meters off route and step onto a cornice, a shelf of snow that looks solid but hangs over empty air. Once it breaks, the fall is instant. The debris field from such collapses often lies in a place where no one can safely reach. Search teams operate with strict rules. They may attempt recovery only if conditions allow. If the risk is too high, they must leave the body behind. Rangers do not say this lightly. Denali is both a national park and a place where the forces of nature demand respect above all else. The goal is to protect the living, even when it means leaving the dead. Over the years, families have traveled to Toledo to speak with rangers, hoping for closure. Rangers explain how glaciers move, how ice flows downward like a slow river carrying everything inside it. A climber lost near 14,000 feet on the Collinear Glacier might emerge decades later near 7,000 feet or never emerge at all. Ice flow models show pathways, but they are not precise. The mountain decides its own timeline. This movement creates strange outcomes. In some cases, climbers lost years apart have been found together, carried into the same crevasse or ice pocket. In 2000, remains uncovered near the glacier were initially thought to belong to a recent victim, but analysis revealed that they were from a climber lost 22 years earlier. In another case, fragments of equipment surfaced but no body carried upward. Biannual freeze-thawing cycles or pushed sideways by shifting ice layers. The mountain gives back pieces, but rarely the whole story. Even experienced mountaineers speak about Denali with caution. The combination of high latitude and high altitude makes the summit feel like a much taller peak. The air is thinner than at similar elevations elsewhere. Fierce storms form abruptly as cold Arctic air slams into the range. Wind speeds can exceed 100 miles per hour. Temperatures at the summit in winter can drop below 60 F, freezing exposed skin instantly. A climber caught unprepared faces risks that no rope team can solve. Park Service archives note cases where climbers made smart decisions, set proper anchors, and followed safe routes, but were still lost when weather changed faster than predicted. The science of forecasting improves every year, yet Denali remains one of the few mountains where even the most seasoned rescuers respond with humility. Then there are the snow graves. In the rare cases where a climber dies in a location reachable by a team, but recovery is impossible due to terrain or weather, rangers perform a burial on site. They dig a pit in the snow, place the body inside, and fill it gently with ice and snow. These burials are marked temporarily, but not permanently, because the glacier will move. Families are informed. The ceremony is simple, solemn, and shaped by necessity. Few national parks contain such places, but Denali does. The idea of the mountain as a keeper of the dead is not a poetic invention. It is a practical truth. Rangers who have worked on Denali for decades speak of it with measured respect. They know where the mountain hides its crevasses, how the snowpack layers develop, and which slopes are prone to avalanches. They also know which missing climbers will never return. Science explains the mechanics, glacial flow rates, accumulation zones, compression layers, melt cycles, tension cracks. But science cannot explain the feeling many climbers describe when they pass certain sections of the route, places where they know they are traveling above both the living and the dead. The mountain carries everything downward, but not in ways humans can fully map. For many who attempt Denali, the knowledge that others still rest beneath the ice becomes part of the climb. It is a reminder that success is not promised, that decisions at altitude must be deliberate, and that nature does not negotiate. Denali does not hide its dangers with noise or drama. Instead, it shows them quietly. A narrow bridge over a crevasse, a steep slope waiting for wind to shift, a stretch of ice that looks solid but isn't. In these spaces, missteps become stories that never reach the summit or the base. The mountain takes, it moves, it keeps, and beneath its shifting glaciers lie the climbers whose tracks ended in places the rest of the world will never see again. The racer who never returned, Michael Lemaitre and Mount Marathon, on July 4th in Seward, Alaska. The air always feels electric. Crowds line the streets, cowbells ring, and runners gather at the base of a mountain that looks almost vertical against the sky. Mount Marathon is only 3,022 feet high, but its race has a reputation that dwarfs mountains 10 times its size. It's steep, fast, slick with loose rock, and unforgiving. The climb is a scramble to then controlled fall. Local runners grow up hearing stories of near misses, broken bones, and rescues. But in 2012, the race took something it had never taken before. A runner who simply vanished. Michael Lemstra was 66 years old. He wasn't a top competitor or a lifelong mountain runner. He entered the race for the challenge, the celebration, and the pride of reaching the summit. Friends described him as determined and patient, not reckless, not arrogant. He had trained on the mountain, but not extensively. Still, he stood at the starting line that afternoon, wearing bib number 548, ready to push himself like everyone else around him. The race started under cloudy skies. Fog clung to the upper slopes, and drizzle made the rocks slick, but Mount Marathon always draws harsh conditions. Runners were used to scrambling through mud, gravel, and fog, thick enough to swallow the mountain. Holdout the course is straightforward on paper. Run through town, climb to the turnaround near the summit, then race straight back down. It's brutal, but it's contained. A tiny mountain in a small town with hundreds of spectators. People assumed that anyone who got into trouble would be found quickly. Lemstra climbed steadily. Volunteers stationed along the route saw him as he made his way through the lower sections. He wasn't fast, but he was moving with purpose. Somewhere, near the steep upper bowl, the fog thickened enough to hide runners from each other. Visibility dropped. The rock became slick. The wind picked up. And somewhere in that last stretch toward the turnaround, witnesses saw him for the final time, tired, covered in mud, but still climbing. And he never returned. When the finish line clock ticked past the window where slower runners normally appeared, race organizers expected him eventually. When more time passed, they radioed volunteers. No one had seen him come down. No one had passed him. Runners descending at speed would normally spot anyone off route, but no one had. The mountain was crowded with hundreds of racers and spectators. Yet somehow, Michael had disappeared inside a space only a few miles wide. Searchers moved quickly. Volunteers ran back up the route. Others spread out along the scree slopes and ridges. The fog was still thick at the top. Helicopters couldn't fly. Ground crews combed the climb. The descent chute, the cliffs, the gullies. They shouted his name. They searched every direction he might have taken if he'd become disoriented or fatigued. Nothing. Hours turned into days. The Alaska state. Troopers, sword fire, trained mountain rescuers and volunteers searched every possible line he could have taken. They traced the creek bed, checked under brush piles, examined cliff drop-offs, and used dogs on the lower slopes. They expanded the search radius beyond what any injured runner could reasonably have covered. Local climbers who knew every ridge and hidden pocket on the mountain joined the effort. Still nothing. Mount Marathon is small compared to Denali or the Chugach Peaks. It sits right behind Seward, surrounded by neighborhoods, streets, and the ocean. To disappear entirely on a mountain like that is almost unheard of. Rescuers said the same thing repeatedly. If he were on the surface, they would have found him. Possible explanations emerged, each unsettling in its own way. Some believed he may have taken a wrong turn in the fog near the summit and wandered onto a side ridge, an area with steep drop-offs and loose shifting rock. A fall there could send a runner down out of sight, hidden by brush and terrain folds. Others pointed to the creek chute used by descending races, a place where slick mud and sharp angles could cause a fall. But that shot was searched thoroughly. There were speculations about hidden crevices, deep vegetation pockets, or steep ravines that could conceal a body. But the mountain had seen rescues there before. and search teams knew where people typically got into trouble. Those spots were checked again and again. What made the case even more baffling was the number of people on the mountain that day. Dozens of runners passed near him. Some saw him pushing upward. Others saw no sign of anyone en route. Crowds of spectators watched the descent. If he'd slipped visibly, someone should have heard it. If he'd fallen near the race line, someone would have spotted him. But the mountain stayed silent. As days passed, the search widened. Helicopters scan the slopes once the weather clears. Infrared imaging was used during the first critical days. Drones and ground teams revisited the area later in the summer. Even years later, hikers would keep an eye out when passing certain areas. A pattern common in Alaska, where landscapes hide more than they reveal. No evidence ever surfaced. Not a shoe, not a piece of clothing, not a bib, not a hydration pack. Nothing that showed where Michael had gone. Race officials in the years that followed adjusted safety protocols. More volunteers were added along the course. Runners were screened more thoroughly. Radio checkpoints improved communication. Mount Marathon's race community carried the weight of the disappearance, an event that shook a tradition stretching back over a century. The fatal decisions in his case were subtle, human, and impossible to fully reconstruct. Entering a difficult race at 66, climbing into fog and rain, continuing upward near the cutoff time. He wanted to finish what he started. He chose determination over a retreat. And on a mountain as steep and technical as Mount Marathon, those decisions can matter in ways no one can foresee. Science offers some explanations for the mystery. Fog can erase landmarks. Steep slopes filled with loose scree can send rocks tumbling like marbles. Vegetation on the lower mountain forms thick mats that can hide objects. Gravity funnels anything that falls into gullies lined with brush roots, and deep holes that aren't visible unless you're directly on top of them. It is possible to be only a few meters off the main trail and still be completely hidden. But none of the science makes the mystery less strange. A man vanished during a public race in daylight with hundreds of eyes on the mountain. He climbed toward the summit of a small peak surrounded by a town. He walked into fog and he never came back down. Into the wild, into the lab, the Chris Mandela's forensic puzzle. The summer air in the Alaskan wilderness bears the scent of spruce, throwing snow, and the promise of solitude. For Chris Mandela's, that air represented a chance to escape everything he felt tied to, and to walk into the wild on his own terms. In April 1992, he hitchhiked into the interior of Alaska, determined to live simply, unbound by convention. By August, he was gone, his story ending on the banks of the Teclanica River near an abandoned bus, known now as Bus 142. He died off the grid, but his death remains entwined with questions of choice, survival, and the limits of knowledge. McCandless spent his first months in the wild, making surprisingly good progress. He carried minimal gear, a small amount of cash, and walked alone across rivers, through forests and over trails fewer than 10 people used each year. He had given away his savings, donated his car, adopted the name Alex Super, and embraced a campfire philosophy. Live deep, seek truth, reject safety nets. His journal entries reflect excitement. Happiness only real when shared, he scribbled on one page. But by July, the landscape had changed, and with it, the balance of his journey. The watershed moment came at the Teclanica River. Snowmelt swelled it, making it impossible by early July. McCandless found himself on the north side of the river, the bus on the south, the mountains beyond the bus his target. He stalked wild potato roots, hunted small game, and attempted to wait for a safe crossing. In late July, he recorded a note. Extremely weak, fault of pot seed, much trouble just to stand up, starving, great jeopardy. That moment draws us into the core of his story. decisions made alone in terrain that punishes miscalculation. Mandalus chose wild potato roots, Heticera alpinum, and later the seeds, which he believed he could eat safely. The roots were edible and had sustained him for weeks. But the seeds may have been a different story. Some investigators argue that he mistook another plant, wild sweet pea, for wild potato, while others contend he ate the right species, but the wrong part. Modified theories emerged. A toxic alkaloid. Schwanine was once proposed. Later, the neurotoxic amino acid BPODUP. Still later, alanine, an antimetabolite found in the seeds in measurable amounts. The scientific record remains disputed, but real. Mandalus may have been weakened not simply by poor calories, but by plant chemistry interfering with his metabolism. At the same time, his minimalist style magnified each small risk. He brought few backups, few provisions, and trusted terrain he barely knew. July in the Alaskan interior is deceptive. Long daylight hours, snow melt turning streams to torrents. Mosquitoes so dense they transform lakeside camps into mist where rivers surge. Trails vanish under alderbrush, and even a strong, fit person finds the going slow and punishing. Mandalus crossed snowpack, salt marsh, scrubwoods, and open muskeg terrain in which hunger, fatigue, and exposure combine quietly. His decision to stay north of the Teclanica while waiting for crossing may have anchored him in one place too long. Storage of seeds in a plastic bag may have further complicated things. Condensation could have allowed mold to form. One hypothesis holds that mold on the seeds produced toxins that blocked Mandalus's ability to absorb nutrients even as he consumed what little he found. Other scientists cite his photo dates and weight drop to argue his starvation was classic. Simply too few calories, too much environment, and too little margin. But the possibility that a plant toxin accelerated the collapse remains compelling. His gear choice also factors heavily. A 20-year-old bus, a small stove, little hunting ammunition, an unreliable water filter, and lightweight boots face terrain built for backpackers with entire mountaineering teams. Rivers rising beneath snow. Melt easily wiped out inlets, shifted trails, or hid holes beneath moss and throwing logs. A seasoned Alaskan traveler told officials that any one of Chris's decisions would be risky. Combined, they became lethal. Instead of retreating or seeking higher ground, Mandalus stayed. Instead of crossing when he might have, he waited. Instead of carrying extra calories, he reduced. Each choice was voluntary. Each one increased his vulnerability. Then there's the question of how the environment responded. Scientists studying remains found in the bus and its surroundings described advanced osteoporosis signs, muscle wasting, and weight consistent with protracted starvation. More than that, though, they described damage to the nervous system consistent with toxin exposure, though not conclusively so. Laboratory studies of the seeds collected near the bus found measurable concentrations of canavanine, though the human toxicity threshold is uncertain. That leads to harsh complexity. Even if the toxin played a role, it likely did so only because Mandalus's diet was thin. His condition weakened, his muscles wasting, and his mind grasping for a way out. The river barrier remained. Weeks of waiting became more than mental frustration. He hunted a moose, shot it, but failed to preserve the meat properly. It was spoiled. He tried remaining calm, waiting for the correct weather for a crossing. Meanwhile, the wild potato roots supplied fewer calories than he needed, and the seeds of them may have hidden the biochemical trap. When rescuers finally arrived on August 6th to recover his body, they found it inside that abandoned bus. A photograph of him inside the doorway, clutching a handwritten message. "I have had a happy life, and thank the Lord. Goodbye, and may God bless all." His weight at death is estimated at 67 pounds. His body lay where he stopped moving. The seam was frozen. In time, The post-mortem examination attributed his death to starvation. Medical notes cite lack of fat reserves, severe muscle wasting, and a body mass index of roughly 13.3, well below the threshold of survival. Yet his journal and behavior hint at potential complicating factors: weakness, inability to stand, the seed reference. Science still debates the mechanism. Was the plant toxin necessary or simply a complication? Could he have walked out if his muscles had remained intact? Could he have crossed the river earlier when snowmelt was less severe, but chose not to? His decision-making chain stretched over months and terrain, each baton passing from idealism to exhaustion. He accepted the challenge of solitude. He accepted minimal supplies. He accepted that nature would define his outcome. His journey has become a cautionary tale for those who dress wilderness in romantic terms. The wild is not forgiving. It is indifferent. A mistaken gear becomes a hazard. A misguided food choice becomes a starvation vector. A river unwatched becomes a permanent barrier. A plant eaten without full knowledge becomes a potential trap. Manless's story blends these threads. Bold will, limited resources, landscape indifferent. He walked into the wild for truth and possibility. He walked out into a forensic puzzle we still debate. In the end, his journal entries, his photographs, the camp at the bus, the seeds collected in a plastic bag all point to the same reality. He was alone, underprepared, determined, and in terrain that revealed his choices gradually. A river he couldn't cross. A diet that spiraled downward. A seed that may have weakened him, a body frozen in place. Science may never definitively tell us what killed him first. Hunger, toxin, exposure. But it does show how intimate the relationship is between human decisions and nature's scale. The diary in the snow. Carl McKeown's last months. The first snow around the lake came quietly, drifting across the spruce trees and settling into the spaces between stones. By then, Kaken had been alone for months. His camp sat beside a remote lake north of the Brooks Range, so far from towns and trails that the only way in or out was by floatplane. In June 1981, he had come here for peace photography and there, Northern Light. He believed he had planned well enough. But as summer bled into fall and fall into early winter, a terrible truth settled over him. No one was coming. Mekon was a wildlife photographer. Friends described him as gentle, curious, and deeply drawn to Alaska's wild places. He wanted a long season in the field to photograph caribou and the changing Arctic light. He chartered a bush pilot to drop him at the lake in March with gear, film, food, rifles, and the sense that he would live simply until pickup in late summer. The problem was buried in the details, in what he believed he had arranged and what he never actually confirmed. He thought he had told the pilot to return in August. He thought he had written his plans clearly, but the pilot later said the agreement was not firm. Mekon had not paid for a return flight, nor set a specific date. It was a small misunderstanding wrapped in the easy trust of a man who believed things would work themselves out. During the first months, life at the lake matched his hopes. He photographed wildlife. He kept a journal. He fixed meals, repaired gear, and documented the migration of caribou across the tundra. But as the weeks passed, he noticed trouble signs. His food supply was shrinking faster than expected. He had counted on regular game and fish to supplement his supplies, but hunting grew inconsistent. When he did get caribou meat, he didn't always preserve it effectively. Fatigue crept in, weather worsened, and still no plane came by late summer. He realized that he might have miscalculated. His journal entries shifted from steady observation to worry. He began rationing food carefully. He counted cartridges. He watched the sky. He set signals for aircraft just in case. But the planes that flew overhead saw nothing unusual. A camp beside the lake, a man standing below, and no sign of distress. On one of those days, a plane did pass close enough to notice him. Mikim waved, but instead of giving the help-needed signal, both arms raised overhead. He gave a friendly wave with one arm. Pilots later said that a single arm wave is a universal sign, meaning all is okay from the cockpit. That's exactly what it looked like. The plane flew on. That small gesture became one of the most fatal decisions in Alaska's wilderness history. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't reckless. It was simply a misunderstanding. One arm lifted instead of two. It meant the difference between rescue and slow starvation. Autumn came early that year. Snow fell, then melted, then rose again in deeper sheets. His diary shows a mind fighting to stay hopeful. He wrote about waiting for help. He wrote about seeing tracks in the snow. He wrote about rationing the last of his rice. The entries became shorter, the handwriting thinner. He burned more firewood, burned through the lists of things he thought he still needed to do, and waited for something to change. He tried leaving the lake to look for help, but the terrain was brutal. Tundra, bog, snow, ice, and he weakened quickly. Returning to the lake was his only choice. As temperatures dropped, he began to understand that he would not survive the winter. His diary reveals a calm that's difficult to comprehend. He wrote about regret without panic. He described mistakes plainly, miscommunication with the pilot, the wave, the lack of a definite pickup date. He thought about his parents and whether they would understand. He wrote about being tired, cold, and losing weight. He wrote that he blamed no one but himself. One entry shows a moment of raw clarity. He knew he did not have enough food to live through another month. By late November, he was too weak to hunt effectively. He could barely stand. The wind off the lake carried the cold straight through his clothes, and even his fire no longer warmed him deeply. He kept writing anyway, preserving his thoughts with the precision of a man who wanted the record of his final weeks to be understood. His last long entries read like a quiet acceptance, an awareness that the wilderness he loved so much had closed in around him. On the final page, he wrote about making one last decision. He did not want to starve. He did not want his body to be dragged away by animals. He constructed a careful plan, wrapped himself in blankets, and used his rifle. It was a choice born not of panic, but of exhaustion and clarity. He ended his life with the same control he had tried to bring to his expedition. Months later in spring, Alaska state troopers flew over the area on a routine patrol and saw the remains of a camp. When they landed, they found Mikim's tent, his camera equipment, and his diary, a record of months of mistakes, endurance, and hope. Inside the diary, they found not fear, but reflection. He apologized to the people he loved. He acknowledged his role in the tragedy. His final words to his parents were gentle, filled with gratitude and sorrow. The troopers also found the small signal flag he had never used, the one he could have raised to tell passing pilots he was in danger. His story, pieced together from those pages, reshaped wilderness training and survival talks across Alaska. Guides still mention the wave, the wrong wave, when teaching new hikers about aircraft signals. Alaskans say his diary is one of the most haunting wilderness documents ever recovered. The story of a man who loved solitude, who planned poorly, who held on longer than most would, and who understood in the end exactly where things had gone wrong. The snow eventually buried his footprints. The wind erased his tracks, but the diary remained, telling how long hope can survive and how quietly it can fade when the wilderness closes its hand. The groaning city of Anchorage's unexplained mechanical howl. In the dark hours before sunrise, when most of Anchorage is still asleep and the streets lie quiet under winter air, a sound began rolling through the southwest side of the city, a long, low groan that didn't match any normal noise of urban life. It wasn't the thump of snow sliding off a roof or the rumble of a distant truck. It wasn't the cracking of ice or the howl of the wind. Residents described it as mechanical, metallic, like a giant hinge turning somewhere beneath the ground or a heavy steel. Door being dragged across concrete dot, it would rise, deepen, fade, then return again minutes later. It started in early 2020, just before dawn on cold mornings. People woke in their beds, unsure whether the noise was outside or inside their homes. Some thought it was a furnace, others a garage door, and some believed it came from far beneath the ground. The Anchorage Daily News collected reports, dozens of residents comparing notes, each describing roughly the same thing. A sound that seemed to move, stretching across blocks, vibrating lightly in the air. Anchorage is not Asmo, quiet town. Aircraft pass overhead constantly. Snowplows grind along the roads. Heating systems rumble through the winter months. Ports, rail lines, pumping stations, and industrial yards all sit within the city's footprint. Yet, locals insisted this sound was different. Too loud, too steady, too unfamiliar. People described it as an unsettling groan, as if the city itself were shifting under the weight of winter. Some residents stepped outside to listen directly. They expected to pinpoint it, a transformer, a plow blade, a warehouse vent. But outside, the noise often sounded even stranger, diffuse, distant almost, like the hum of a ship coming through fog. Others tried recording it. The audio captured low-frequency pulses, like metal under stress or machinery, pushing slowly against resistance. The uncertainty created an eerie feeling. Anchorage is surrounded by vast wilderness and shaped by the forces of cold, ice, and shifting earth. But inside the neighborhoods, people expect a certain predictability. The groan challenged that expectation. A modern city with all its mapping, machinery, sensors, and schedules still held a sound no one could trace. As complaints grew, theories multiplied. Some pointed to the nearby airport, Ted Stevens Anchorage International, one of the busiest cargo hubs in the world. Could jet engines warming up at odd hours echo strangely across the snowpack? Acoustic specialists said that cold air can bend sound in unusual ways, especially during temperature inversions when warm layers form above cold air near the ground. Such inversions can trap low-frequency sound and bounce it over large distances. A single engine run-up could travel miles and sound dislocated from its actual source. But airport officials said they had no unusual nighttime operations in that area. Flight patterns didn't match the timing of the reports, and many residents insisted. They knew the difference between airplane noise and whatever this was. Another theory pointed to industrial yards near the coast. Metal containers shifting, cranes moving, or ships adjusting at port. But the sound was heard even on days when the port was silent. And the neighbors closest to those facilities said the noise did not originate there. Others suggested ice. Anchorage sits beside Cook Inlet, a body of water with some of the most extreme tides in North America. When the inlet freezes, tidal change can push massive sheets of ice together or tear them apart, creating deep groans and booms that echo across neighborhoods. Longtime residents had heard those sounds before. They were sharp, abrupt, like distant thunder. But the 2020 noise was slower, more rhythmic, and seemed to come from land rather than sea. Heating systems and ventilation fans were also considered. Many large buildings have pressure relief fans, industrial heaters, or automated exhaust cycles that activate at night. Sound bouncing from these structures could create unusual acoustic effects. Experts noted that metal contraction and expansion in extreme cold can generate groaning sounds, especially in large facilities. But if that were the case, the source should have been found quickly. Instead, the noise continued for weeks. Sometimes it happened nightly, sometimes not at all. Some families said it woke them repeatedly, always in the same window of time between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. others said. They heard it only when temperatures dropped below a certain point. People walked the streets trying to locate the sound. They followed it from block to block, but it seemed to slide away as they approached. Acoustic specialists pointed out that low-frequency noises behave differently from normal sound. They can travel through the ground, along frozen soil, through building frames, and across ice-coated surfaces. They can reflect off temperature layers in the atmosphere, creating phantom sound sources that seem closer or further than they are. In winter cities, these distortions can become extreme. Still, even with these explanations, something about the Anchorage groan felt unresolved. Unlike short-lived mystery booms, which are common in cold climates and usually linked to frostquakes, ice shifts, or construction activity, this noise was sustained and repetitive. It seemed almost patterned. It was not explosive, but continuous. It wasn't localized, but drifting. It wasn't loud enough to shake windows, but strong enough to unsettle sleep. Some residents described it as a NC's version of a house settling, but on a city scale. Others found it comforting in a strange way. A reminder that living in Alaska means sharing space, not only with wilderness, but with the strange physics of cold. Eventually, as temperatures shifted and winter eased, the reports decreased. The sound faded, returning only occasionally in similar atmospheric conditions. Anchorage returned to its normal winter rhythms. The crack of lake ice, the hum of snow, machines, the wind rushing through neighborhoods. But for those who heard the mechanical groan of early 2020, the memory lingers. They describe standing on quiet sidewalks, listening to something move through the darkness, carried on layers of frozen air. A sound too mechanical to be natural, too natural to be machinery. A sound that belonged to no one and yet belonged to the city itself. A reminder that even in a modern place carved out of wilderness, some noises come without answers. The town of Hollywood turned into an abduction story. Nome's missing. Nome does not look like the kind of place where myths grow. It sits on the edge of the Bering Sea, facing a horizon of water, ice, and fog. Its streets are simple, its buildings low to the ground, its winters long and punishing. People know each other, rely on each other, and treat the weather as a force that must be respected every day. Yet for years, Nome has carried a shadow, a pattern of disappearances that rarely made national news until Hollywood transformed the town into something far stranger than it is. The truth began long before the myth. From the 1960s through the early 2000s, residents of Nome and surrounding villages noticed a troubling pattern. People went missing at rates higher than expected for a town so small. The victims were mostly Alaskan native, many of them in Nupiat or Yupik. Some vanished after nights out. Some disappeared while traveling between communities. Others were last seen walking home in brutal winter conditions. In Nome, the distance between a bar and a front door can hold life-threatening danger when temperatures drop. Wind picks up and snow begins to fall sideways. Families asked questions. Rumors circulated. Over time, more than 24 cases accumulated. Some found, some never recovered. Some discovered far from where they were last seen. In a place as isolated as western Alaska, where roads end just outside town and river ice shifts constantly, missing person cases rarely follow neat narratives. In the early 2000s, pressure grew for answers. The FBI was called in to review the disappearances. Their investigation covered years of case files, weather reports, witness interviews, and search and rescue missions. They mapped the locations, patterns, and circumstances. They examined whether the cases pointed to foul play, a serial offender, or a systemic threat. Their conclusion was not dramatic and must be and not at all what Hollywood would later promote. The FBI report determined that the disappearances were not linked by a single perpetrator. Instead, They reflected the harsh realities of life in remote Alaska. Freezing temperatures, limited transportation, dangerous river crossings, alcohol misuse, and a lack of warming shelters open at night. Nome's winters can kill in minutes. Snowdrifts bury footprints. River ice cracks without warning. A disoriented or intoxicated person can become lost within a few hundred yards of home, their body discovered months later after spring melt. The reality was painful, but not paranormal. Then came the movie that changed the narrative. In 2009, Universal Pictures released The Fourth Kind, a film that marketed itself as based on real events in Nome: alien abductions, unexplained disappearances, and government cover-ups. The film used fake documentary footage, actors portraying victims, and a fictional psychologist who claimed Nome was experiencing extraterrestrial visitations. None of it was real, but the marketing blurred the line, using the town's real missing person tragedies to sell a story about aliens. Nome residents felt blindsided. Families who had lost loved ones felt exploited. Local officials released statements reminding people that the disappearances were real, that grieving families still existed, and that none of the cases had anything to do with abductions. The FBI had never suggested anything beyond environmental and social factors. But the film stuck in the national imagination, leaving Nome labeled as a hot spot for unexplained vanishings. Not because of what happened, but because of what people were told to believe. Stepping back from the myth, the real cases reveal something far more grounded and far more